When my grandfather passed away, I thought the only thing I had left of him was his old ranch, quiet, tucked away, and full of memories. I never imagined that an HOA, a group of people I had never even met, would show up at my door claiming that my family land somehow fell under their control. Within weeks of inheriting the ranch, I got a letter demanding that I pay $250,000 in fees and assessments. They said it was for neighborhood improvements, landscaping, and security. The crazy part? I didn't even live in their neighborhood. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake, but then the HOA president, along with her board, made it clear they weren't joking. They showed up in person, treating me like some outsider trespassing on my own land. They spoke with authority, quoting rules, waving papers, and trying to intimidate me into signing. I remember standing there, holding my grandfather's pocket knife in my hand, thinking this is not what he would have wanted. That's when I decided to dig deeper. I pulled out old deeds, maps, and survey records from the county office, determined to prove them wrong. What I discovered left me in shock. Not only did my ranch not fall under their HOA, but the original property lines showed something far bigger, something that made their entire neighborhood rest on what was technically my land. And when I confronted them with the truth, the story took a turn that no one, not even the HOA, saw coming. I couldn't shake what I had just found in those dusty county records. The more I read, the more unbelievable it became. My grandfather had been careful with his land. Over the years, he had purchased small adjoining parcels whenever neighbors wanted to sell, slowly piecing together what became a massive stretch of property. It wasn't just a ranchette, it was almost an entire valley. The documents clearly showed boundaries that went far beyond the fence line I had always known. And the kicker: the HOA subdivision had been built years later, right inside that boundary. At first, I thought maybe it was some outdated paperwork, but the deeds were all stamped, recorded, and legal. The county survey maps left no doubt. My grandfather had owned it fair and square, and by inheritance. Now it was mine. Suddenly, the HOA's threats and outrageous $250,000 demand made a lot more sense. Maybe they knew something I didn't. Maybe that's why they were so aggressive from the start. The president of the HOA, sharp-tongued woman named Carol, had been the loudest voice against me. She carried herself like she owned the world, telling me my ranch was non-compliant and my family's land history didn't matter anymore. The way she said it made my blood boil. But instead of lashing out, I stayed quiet, studying her words. She seemed too confident, like she believed no one would ever question her authority. But now I had leverage, and I couldn't stop wondering what would happen once the truth came out. Would they back down, or would exposing this land dispute set off an even bigger fight? The days that followed were filled with uneasy silence. On one side, I had the county records proving my family's ownership. On the other, I had an HOA acting like they could bury me in fines, paperwork, and endless harassment until I gave in. What made things worse was how quickly the neighborhood seemed to rally behind Carol. Neighbors who barely knew me began treating me like some kind of villain. They whispered about me when I drove into town. I even caught one of them snapping photos of my property from the roadside. I started digging deeper into how the HOA operated. From what I learned, most of the residents didn't actually know the limits of their own deeds. They trusted the board to handle things, which meant Carol's word was practically law. She thrived on that control, and the more I watched her, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about money. It was about power. She didn't want me to prove ownership, because that would mean admitting their entire neighborhood was standing on shaky ground. But there were cracks in her armor. I met a couple of homeowners who quietly admitted they were tired of the endless dues and surprise assessments. One older man even told me he had considered selling, but discovered the HOA made it nearly impossible without extra fees. That planted a seed in my mind. If I could show them what I'd uncovered, maybe some of them would turn against Carol. Still, every move I made had to be careful. If I pushed too soon, the HOA could hit me with lawsuits or try to tie me up in court for years. I couldn't afford mistakes. And yet, the deeper I went, the more I realized the stakes were much higher than I first thought. The pressure kept building like a storm on the horizon. Every day that passed, the HOA seemed to tighten its grip. Letters kept arriving at my mailbox, each one stamped with bold red ink, demanding payment and warning of further action. Carol even sent a notice claiming they could put a lien on my ranch if I didn't comply. It was laughable, considering the evidence I held. But the intimidation tactics were relentless. I decided it was time to make a move of my own. I scheduled a private meeting with the county land office to confirm, once again, that the deeds were legitimate. When the clerk pulled the same maps I had already seen, tracing the lines with her pen and explaining that the subdivision sat squarely within my grandfather's property, my heart raced. The truth was undeniable. But what would happen when I brought it to the HOA's doorstep? Word must have gotten out that I was digging, because the atmosphere around me grew hostile. One evening, I came home to find survey flags placed along the edge of my driveway, as if someone was trying to redraw the lines overnight. Neighbors stopped waving. A group of board members even parked outside the ranch gate, staring as though daring me to come talk to them. The tension reached its peak when I was invited, more like summoned, to attend the next HOA meeting. The message was clear. Either I showed up and faced them on their turf, or they would escalate things further. As I stood at the threshold of their clubhouse, with a thick folder of deeds in my hands and every eye turning toward me, I knew this was the moment everything would come to a head. The HOA meeting started exactly how I expected: cold stares, whispered side conversations, and Carol sitting at the front table like a queen guarding her throne. She wasted no time in slamming a thick binder onto the desk, announcing to everyone that I was refusing to comply with community standards, and that my so-called ranch was a nuisance. The room buzzed with agreement, but I held my ground, clutching the folder of deeds I had brought. When I finally spoke, laying out the original property lines for everyone to see, the room went silent. Some of the board members shifted uncomfortably, and a few homeowners even leaned forward, squinting at the maps. For the first time, I saw doubt flicker across Carol's face. But then she pulled out something that made my stomach drop. It wasn't just about fines anymore. She claimed the HOA had already begun proceedings to secure parts of my land for community use, presenting what looked like legal documents stamped with signatures. I knew immediately something wasn't right. The dates didn't match, the language felt rushed, and worse, my grandfather's name appeared on one of the pages even though he had passed years before it was filed. If what I suspected was true, this wasn't just intimidation, it was fraud. The room erupted into chaos. Some residents demanded answers. Others stared at me like I had opened a door they weren't ready to walk through. And in that heated moment, I realized the battle wasn't only about reclaiming my rights, it was about exposing just how far the HOA was willing to go to keep control. And that revelation was about to turn the entire neighborhood upside down. The room felt like it was about to split in two. On one side, Carol and her board clung to their binders and fake authority. On the other, a growing number of homeowners were starting to question everything. I laid the county maps flat on the table, pointing out the dates, the stamps, the signatures that proved my claim. Then, side by side, I held up Carol's so-called documents. The differences were obvious, and murmurs began to spread across the room. Someone even shouted, "That's forged." And suddenly, the spotlight wasn't on me anymore, it was on her. Carol tried to shout over the noise, but the crowd wasn't listening. A few residents demanded the board step down immediately, while others pulled out their phones, snapping photos of the evidence. The meeting spiraled into shouting, but I stayed calm, reminding them all that I wasn't there to take their homes. I was there to protect what my family had built. My voice cut through the chaos, and for the first time, the balance of power shifted. The climax came when the county clerk I had spoken with earlier walked into the meeting, holding certified copies of the original deeds. I had asked her to be there as backup, just in case. When she confirmed everything I'd said in front of the entire HOA, the room erupted. Carol's face went pale, and board members quietly slipped out, one by one. It felt like the fight was finally over. But just as relief washed over me, the clerk leaned closer and whispered something I hadn't expected. My grandfather had left behind one more parcel, never disclosed, and it wasn't just land, it was the water rights for the entire valley. Suddenly, I realized the battle might only just be beginning. I walked out of that meeting with the weight of generations on my shoulders, but also with a sense of peace I hadn't felt since inheriting the ranch. The HOA's threats had crumbled in front of their own members, and Carol's grip on the neighborhood finally broke. Within weeks, the board was dissolved, and several residents approached me, not with anger, but with apologies. Many admitted they had only followed along because they didn't know any better. For the first time, they saw me not as an enemy, but as the rightful heir to the land their homes stood on. As for the surprise about the water rights, it changed everything. The old well systems and creek access that my grandfather had secured decades earlier meant I held more than property, held the future of the valley. At first, the responsibility scared me, but then I realized it gave me the chance to set things right. Instead of using it as leverage or revenge, I worked with the county to make sure access was fair and sustainable for everyone. It turned a fight over land into a solution that benefited the whole community. Looking back, the ranch taught me more than I expected. It wasn't just about boundaries or deeds, it was about standing firm when others try to intimidate you, and about honoring the legacy of those who came before. The HOA tried to take $250,000 from me, but instead, I uncovered the truth that gave me back more than money ever could. In the end, I didn't just claim a neighborhood, I reclaimed my family's story and made sure it would carry forward for generations.